You're joining the Loudr Lawyer Network, the podcast where we sit down with the law firm owners, attorneys, and visionaries that are making the most noise in the legal landscape nationwide to find out the secrets to their success. Other podcasts think they're getting loud, but we're getting louder. Let's get into it.
Hello. Welcome to the Loudr Lawyer Network, where we help attorneys scale to $1 million months through powerful strategies and connections. Today, I have two distinguished guests, David R. Chase and Scott Silver, SEC Whistleblowers. Welcome to the podcast, y'all.
Thank you for having us.
Thank you.
Did I give you guys the correct intro? The intro. Can you, Scott? I know that you have a law firm that deals with the SEC, representing whistleblowers and things of that nature. The same with you, David, when you guys teamed up. But can you give the audience a definition of what you do?
Yeah. So Scott and I have a very kind of unique professional relationship. Scott and I both have our own law firms, but we have over the last several years created a strategic alliance where our two firms work together representing SEC whistleblowers, meaning those who blow the whistle, who speak up, who expose securities fraud and report it to the government. My practice, and then I'll turn it over to Scott to describe his practice other than whistleblower. Whistleblower work is our intersection, but I'm a former SEC prosecutor. I used to investigate and prosecute as an enforcement lawyer for the SEC in the Miami office back in the late 90s. And my primary practice, or a good part of it, is representing those being investigated and prosecuted by the SEC, right. Which kind of lends itself to cooperating those whistleblowers with the SEC. It's just the other side of the coin. So that's my background, that's my experience. And with Scott, we co-represent whistleblowers who report violations to the SEC.
You guys are kind of like the dynamic duo,
as some would say.
Yes.
So, as David said, it is a very unique relationship. It is a very dynamic relationship because of our unique backgrounds in the same industry. So as compared to Dave, I've started out with a Wall Street defense firm, but for the last 25 years, I've really focused my practice on representing investors in securities and investment fraud cases. What makes the SEC whistleblower practice somewhat different and really gives a great synergy between David and I is that our clients are all people who are reporting frauds to the SEC that we believe the SEC should take an interest in and should want to investigate. But our clients could run the gamut from investors who have been defrauded to industry insiders who work within major brokerage firms and companies who are aware of fraud and think it should be reported to the SEC, to industry analysts and due diligence experts who look at the industry reports. So they all come to us with the same thing, frequently frustrated. He has been listening to them and they think the SEC should take interest in investigating a fraud. But our client base is fairly broad and dynamic.
Oh, what beautiful. Hey, take me back, you guys, to the moment before you decided to become, what impacted you where you wanted to work in law, becoming attorneys in the financial space? What was that change? Tell me how that came about. Starting with you, David.
Well, I was working out of law school. I worked for Greenberg Traurig, which was then a big regional firm. It's now a large international firm, but then it was still significantly big. And I had started my first year as a lawyer trading in the stock market, and I became fascinated by the markets. And I thought, well, I'm not really exactly sure where I want to go with the law. And I started to develop an interest in the intersection between law and the financial markets, right? And the trading that I was doing and the more that I was learning about the markets. And I had an opportunity at Greenberg Traurig to work with a former SEC enforcement lawyer on a very large securities fraud investigation. And I spent a good time up in New York working with him. And he ultimately said to me, he said, look, don't tell anybody I told you, okay? But if you really want to do this work, quit your high-paying job here, leave the big law firm, and go take a pay cut and go work for the SEC and learn the ropes. And that's what I did. And I did that for almost 4 years. It was the best career decision I ever made because I had the benefit of working inside and getting an institutional knowledge of how the SEC investigates, settles its cases, and prosecutes. And I've taken that and applied it in my defense work, and I've also applied it now in my whistleblower work with Scott and his firm, the Silver Law Group.
And Scott, what was that moment like when you
Yeah,
decided?
so I came from
Go ahead.
So I think it's a little bit more preordained for me. I'm from a family of lawyers, so I was very familiar with the practice. But when I was in high school, growing up Long Island, New York, a lot of my friends from high school ended up at these brokerage firms on Long Island that ended up getting in a lot of trouble. And candidly ended up being featured in movies like Wolf of Wall Street that a lot of people are familiar with.
Yes.
And I got very interested in Wall Street, the stock market, really understanding how that world operated. In law school, I actually interned at the Securities and Exchange Commission, got a little bit of experience at the SEC there for it. But then I was very fortunate coming out of law school, went and interviewed with one of the big Wall Street defense firms and ended up doing a lot of legal defense work for those for a lot of people who were bluntly in a lot of trouble back in the 90s.
Yes. You mentioned Wall Street. Wall Street was was the first big film that with Michael Douglas, but you have movies that have shown about fraud and things in Wall Street. Wolf of Wall Street, The Boiler Room, Trading Places. Someone remember with Eddie Murphy and those things. Tell me, what's the for those who are watching and don't know what an SEC whistleblower is or fraud? Could you explain what truly goes on in that world? Because that's a different type of injury that happens to people, and it hits them in many areas.
Yeah. So the SEC, the Securities and Exchange Commission, is the federal civil law enforcement agency that regulates the stock markets, right? They do a lot of things, but they enforce the federal securities laws. They make rules for the markets. They license securities professionals, et cetera, et cetera. They're very small. It's a very small agency, and one of the few federal agencies that is consistently profitable. Meaning they bring in and more in fines and imposition of fees on the issuance of stock than they spend. It's really heavily weighted with professionals, with lawyers, with accountants, with scientists, with economists. It's a phenomenal organization. It serves a very, very important purpose. The SEC a number of years ago, I think, in large response to the Madoff situation, right? The huge fraud with Madoff,
Enron.
started to think creatively of how they could get ahead of some of these frauds. And I may be off on the timing a bit, but I think it was an impetus to create a financial incentive for individuals, whistleblowers, to provide original information to the SEC, that if the SEC uses it and it initiates an investigation and then, let's say settles with the company or the individual or sues and recovers over $1 million judgment, the whistleblower, assuming you provided the original information and cooperated, et cetera, is entitled to anywhere between 10 to 30% of what the government collects, assuming that the judgment is for more than $1 million. So there have been some whistleblower awards of over $100 million to an individual whistleblower. The SEC has paid out, since the inception of the whistleblower program, more than $1 billion plus to whistleblowers. And if you just reverse calculate the math on that, that means they've brought in over $3 billion, right? Because they pay up to almost a third. So it's been a very, very important facet of their enforcement program. And it's been very lucrative for individuals who have information, who have the courage to speak out speak out louder, right? And expose fraud of very powerful individuals, committed by very powerful individuals and corporations. And so that's what we do. We represent whistleblowers who participate in that whistleblower program. And Scott and I are contingency fee lawyers. We take the case on a contingency fee. And if our clients don't recover, we don't get paid. If they recover, we take a percentage of their, it's called a whistleblower bounty, the 10 to 30% of what the government collects.
Well,
That's how it works.
That's very interesting. It's almost like taking a case if a person has been injured in an auto accident. You know, for my show, we talk to a lot of PI attorneys, and I figure in this case, there's a lot of people that are being hurt. The shareholders of certain companies that are getting defrauded or short sold, if you will. People that pump and dump schemes that happen. I mentioned Enron earlier. There was a whistleblower in that case as well, I'm sure.
Absolutely. There's tremendous economic harm and devastation to investors. And it also really does damage to the integrity of the financial markets. And if people don't trust the integrity of the financial markets, they're not going to bring and raise capital here, which, you know, goes to the health and security and welfare of our country. So there's a lot of implications and consequences of having markets that are, you know, or of having fraud and systemic fraud in the financial markets. It's impactful, and it's far-reaching.
So to recovering funds, and correct me if I'm wrong, but David, I saw that you were a receiver. So as a receiver, is that someone that the government or that the legal system would place in that company once everyone has been kicked out, like to be able to recover funds and things of that nature and take care of all the loose ends or find out where all those funds went?
That's exactly right. That's exactly right. I've served as a receiver in, I think, maybe 3 SEC cases and 6 or 7 FTC, Federal Trade Commission cases. What happens is, let's say the SEC will file an emergency lawsuit alleging fraud, seeking emergency powers like asset freezes, et cetera, including the appointment of a receiver. And that's an individual to go who by court order, the court has to approve it. The court may pick another individual, but usually the SEC gives 3 names with 1 recommendation of the 3. And if you're chosen by the judge to serve as receiver, there's a court order issuing you, basically making you as the receiver, and you are responsible for, among other things, of taking over the business, investigating, reporting to the court, and protecting the interests of the investors, marshaling its assets, bringing suit against third parties that may have done wrong, and ultimately attempting to do your best to recover as much to make as many investors as whole as possible.
Well, that seems like an opportunity for you to really step up and give back. How did you feel when you had your first case? Scott, take me back to how that first case looked when you had a whistleblower call. If not breaking any rules or anything, any laws, but tell me what that.
Right, without disclosing a client name, going, you know, the SEC whistleblower program, it's relatively new. It's only about 10 to 12 years old at this point, right? It hasn't been around for a long time. It's had a very quick, very dramatic impact. And actually one of the first whistleblower clients who came to me, you know, came in, and it's something that I was surprised by at the time, but I've come to be a bit of a universal truth. Many of these whistleblowers aren't really incentivized by the money. That's not their driving force. The whistleblower came to me because he had reported it internally at his company. He was already trying to shout it from the rooftop that there was a problem. Something stinks in our house. And instead of his superiors taking action and stopping it, he really basically got fired for trying to talk about the problem. He was angry. He was frustrated. And came to us, and we reported to the SEC, and we were able to convince the SEC he had collected a wealth of material and information that this company needed to be investigated. They were prosecuted, and ultimately, and more satisfying to my client than the money he received, is that he had worked internally at a company that he knew was defrauding investors, actually helped them get their money back. So, it was a very obvious feel good type of moment. And I learned a great deal about the whistleblowers themselves and their process, their mentality by going through that process. It really turned out to be a constant amongst many of our cases.
You mentioned the whistleblower. He got fired. Do you guys have situations where a whistleblower wants to protect their identity? And have you had situations where a whistleblower stated something, but then he rejected? He took back what he said, tried to back out of it. And what do you do in that kind of situation once you have gotten into the financial dealings of that company and find that there is wrongdoings? What do you do in that situation?
Well, so first of all,
David.
There is a provision or the ability in the SEC whistleblower program to file anonymously, as long as you're represented by counsel. Some of our clients feel more comfortable filing anonymously. It doesn't, and so the SEC doesn't know who they are. In a number of instances, though, they start by filing anonymously. We file it on their behalf. They get comfortable with the program. Assuming the SEC investigates, they start being interviewed by the SEC lawyers, and they essentially come out, if you will, and identify their who they are. Because really, it helps with credibility for the SEC to know actually who they are. It puts a face to the individual, and it also comes to a point in particularly smaller companies where it just becomes, it's not hard to figure out for the SEC as they learn more about the situation, who the whistleblower likely is. And so, ironically, when the SEC knows who the SEC whistleblower is, they can take steps to better protect him or her, right? Because they know who the whistleblower is. Now, just because they're no longer anonymous relative to the SEC does not mean the SEC makes it public. They keep that absolutely confidential, and there's very strict rules. So even though the individual whistleblower is no longer kind of an anonymous, the SEC will still seek to keep them anonymous from the public. There are limited exceptions to that, but generally speaking, they keep it confidential. If you have a situation, and I'll let Scott answer this because, sometimes we deal with it. If we do have a whistleblower, if I understand your question, that does provide inaccurate information, and I'll let Scott deal with that. There's steps we take.
Yeah, I mean, truth and honesty is essential in this process. I mean, we frequently tell clients that we could protect their keeping them anonymous to the best that we can. Many times we might disclose to the SEC, but then not necessarily disclose to the company. But once you're going to go and file and cooperate with the SEC, I frequently say these cases, you need to deliver them to the SEC with a red bow. You got to present a full and robust set of facts and information, but it's got to be correct. It's got to be accurate. We haven't had a tremendous amount of clients. I mean, there's not a lot of reason why they would come in and not be honest or truthful with us, but sometimes you got to separate what is fact versus what is speculation. What do you think happened versus what do you actually know happened? Frequently has to be separated out. We all go by our gut at moments, but it doesn't always work out that is correct. So we're very careful when talking with the commission to fully acknowledge, here's what we know. Here are facts that we could demonstratively prove, and then here's what we think happened or might have happened. But here's we're speculating or making an educated guess based upon the information and materials to us at this time, which is the way most lawsuits begin, right? You believe you know what happened, you raise allegations, and then you get into discovery and you learn more and more as the case moves forward.
We do our best like any attorney should on the front end in screening and filtering for new clients. We get probably 20 leads a day, and I mean, it just is what it is. And there's some that are more interesting or potentially meritorious than others. So we take very few and file very few of the hundreds or thousands that we get over the year. We only file a few because it's very difficult to find an individual who's credible, who's in a position to know, who has documentation, who can articulate it, and who's willing to commit to the process. And that assumes it's a target company that has money, right? Ideally, a big multinational that can stroke a check for 8 figures without blinking is a cost of doing business, because that's how we get paid. It's just because otherwise it's a great set of facts and there's fraud and there's a whistleblower. We also need a target that can pay, because if it doesn't pay, we don't get paid. So the stars have to come, kind of together in a line for it to work. But a lot of it is on the front end. And as Scott says, we always strive to be very candid with the SEC. We tell them what the whistleblower knows, and we also tell him what he does not know, right? For credibility, for accuracy, and so that the SEC gets an understanding of the scope of their knowledge, which is critical. And not every whistleblower is going to know everything. But as to what they know, they need to have a basis for it and be able to articulate it and ideally prove it.
Right. So have you ever run into a situation, people out there that whistleblow, like if they've gotten fired, say they've gotten fired from a job, and then all of a sudden they're like all come up with stories. How do you handle those? How do you handle those cases? People that come with untruths, like a whistleblower that comes with untruths. Are you reading their body language? How do you discover if
you listen to them?
Yeah,
you listen
absolutely.
to the story. And we've been doing it long enough, Scott and I, between the two of us. We know when there's something there or not.
At the end of the day, I'm a trial lawyer. I like being in a courtroom and assessing witness credibility, and everybody's testifying is important. But for this kind of work, the other thing is when they make a statement, how do you support that statement? What documents, what evidence do you have to support that? Sometimes, look, there are more times than I'd like to count. It's actually incredibly frustrating. A client who comes to me and says these 3 things, and I say, well, how are you going to prove that? How do you support it? Well, I can't. And unfortunately, that might not be a case we could take, because they might be absolutely correct. But if they don't have the facts and evidence to support it, it's not something we necessarily believe the SEC is going to investigate. They get tens of thousands of tips a year. To get their attention requires a great deal of work. Unfortunately, out there right now in society, everybody knows about Bernie Madoff, but there are a ton of financial frauds and Ponzi schemes still going on within our community. It doesn't mean we need to assess and be able to prove every fact we're going to allege. I think Madoff, one of the most interesting things is that the person who reported initially, his name was Markopoulos, who got a lot of press and attention. His underlying core fact, to the best of my recollection, was reporting to the SEC that it was impossible that the trading he was reporting was actually occurring on the exchanges because it wasn't reported. He had a empirical piece of evidence that, as long as you pulled on that thread, would have exposed the entire thing, and that was his frustration. He didn't know every aspect of the Madoff Ponzi scheme and fraud, but it's certain things that if they had investigated and he was able to prove empirically, would have helped shut it down years earlier. And frequently that is what we have in our cases. Now, when we don't think clients are being honest or truthful, well, those are just people we can't represent.
in terms of stocks, like in terms of trading, do you guys just deal with penny stocks? You deal with what markets do you guys look at in terms of fraud? Where is fraud usually found in your line of work?
It runs the gambit from anything from very large multi-million-dollar Ponzi schemes to typically accounting fraud or
What is a
financial
Ponzi
fraud.
scheme? What is a Ponzi scheme for those
Pon-
listening?
Ponzi scheme is a type of fraud where the enterprise is basically run where they're taking new investor funds to pay old investors. Basically robbing Peter to pay Paul. So they may claim they have some successful business, but there's no business. It's a fraud. They claim, let's say, they have some invention to turn air into gold and they're making tons of money. Doesn't exist. All they're doing is taking new investor funds and using it to pay old investors. Once the new investor funds dry up, it collapses.
Wow.
That's a Ponzi scheme, and it's been around since Charles Ponzi, an Italian immigrant, ran the first Ponzi back in New York City back in the day. To sophisticated manipulations, stock manipulations, crypto frauds, and accounting fraud by large publicly traded companies. I mean, again, because of how it works with the whistleblower program, ideally our target companies are not penny stocks because they will likely not be around in a year. Okay. We want to find fraud, and it's harder to because it's so there's such large institutions, and the biggest of the publicly traded companies, because that's where the largest potential rewards are going to be. The SEC has basically two forms of financial remedies when they sue. It's something called disgorgement, where a company has to pay back their illicit or ill-gotten gain or illegal profits, and also a civil penalty to punish them for their bad acts. So if you rob a bank, it's not sufficient that you pay back the money plus some interest and you're done. You also have to pay a penalty to be punished for that, right? Punishment, and also to deter you and everybody else from robbing a bank again. So it's the penalties typically against these big publicly traded companies that can range in the tens to hundreds of millions of dollars.
Wow, there's been so
Hey,
many
I always
cases.
think it's worth highlighting. Yeah. Oh, I'm sorry,
Go ahead.
but I always think it's worth highlighting. You had asked a question about, and you mentioned earlier Enron, WorldCom, Enron. These were some of the biggest companies in America at the time, and they were massive financial frauds that created massive losses for mom and pop America across the way. It sounds like we
Yes.
might share a bit of a passion for movies. So I'd like talk, the penny stock trading companies, they make for a heck of a movie, crazy stories. I've played in that world where you talk about the Wolf of Wall Street, Boiler Room,
Boiler room. Yeah.
trading places. I would highly recommend, if you haven't seen, a movie called Margin Call, which was all
Yes,
about the
that's on my list.
2008 financial crash. And a fantastic movie talking about, and The Big Short. And you start to appreciate, I think Wolf of Wall Street at the end of the day was about $200 million in losses. When you look at the 2008 financial crisis caused by the major Wall Street brokerage firms out there trading mortgage-backed securities, the numbers were in the billions upon billions of dollars. True financial devastation for American society. So, like I said, the penny stock world makes for a lot of interesting stories. It's always part of, for every successful story, there's 99 failures in that world. But we work on a lot of cases involving massive, financial accounting frauds, and manipulations at some of the biggest companies in America. And it's heartbreaking when you really see how these come about, and people who could run legitimate businesses without going as far as the securities laws and pushing the envelope. But that's where we do see a tremendous amount of action, and a lot of more attention needs to be played on those scenarios.
You said something about the penny stocks and things of that nature that hurt the mom and pops. Have either of you gotten into a situation where you've come into a situation where there's been pump and dump or insider trading? Can you explain what that is? And a lot of those victims, sometimes old people that have put their pension, their retirement fund into these type of companies. How do you deal with those type of clients, or have you had those type of clients?
I'll let Scott address the impact on the investment.
So
Quickly just comment.
I'll take the pump and dump and let David
you
address
take the
insider
pump, I'll take
trading.
Insider trading. Insider trading.
Because
I'm sorry.
Go ahead, Scott.
yeah. So
We're like an old married couple.
We live in interesting
talk over
times.
each other.
Yes, but we usually have and we see these different scenarios. And right now, AI is obviously having a huge impact on the world and having a lot of benefits, but it's also creating a great deal of harm. We are getting calls from seniors who are getting defrauded in, internet scams. We're now using AI. I get calls from an investor. Well, Elon Musk and Mark Cuban was recommending a penny stock to me, not appreciating that this was a fake AI controlled module taking advantage of them. You don't need the Long Island boiler room anymore to create a pump and dump scheme. And the technology is moving very quickly these days. I've worked on hundreds of pump and dump cases throughout my career. It's almost easier for a bad guy to run a pump and dump scheme today than it was 30 years ago, using AI, using the internet to go out there and promote. And the SEC is playing catch up, and the SEC is bringing more and more of these cases. They're highlighting how many of these are happening offshore. And we're seeing more and more of these cases. I've reported quite a few to the commission over the years and being prosecuted. So we'd like to see more of them shut down. We'd like to see more prosecutions taking place by the SEC. But I'm always happy to make the joke that I'd be happy to put my law firm out of business and just teach people how to avoid falling a victim to some of these pump and dump schemes. Because there is nothing more heartbreaking when you have a retiree who calls you up and says, "I've lost my life savings investing in what turned out to be a financial fraud."
How does that affect you? How do you respond to someone like that? Has that happened to you? And how did you respond to that person that lost?
It happened. Sometimes you're wearing multiple different hats as a lawyer in this niche. Okay, not just as a lawyer, but almost like a therapist, talking to them, explaining what happened. Sometimes you have to, unfortunately, look at a client and say, "Well, you have been defrauded. I don't know if there's much that I'm going to be able to do for you." Unfortunately, there's a tremendous amount of fraud that's being orchestrated offshore. A big thing that's received a lot of talk lately are what called pig butchering scams, where people are being encouraged to invest in crypto and other assets and then being told they made a big profit, but they have to pay various fees, fines, costs in order to withdraw their money. And all they're doing is convincing these victims to send more money. And then ultimately, they give the functional equivalent of turning off the phone. They know to stop speaking to them and the money's gone. So unfortunately, in many of those circumstances, I'm as much therapist as I am lawyer.
And there's no recovery for those victims. Money's gone.
Sometimes there are. Sometimes there are ways, but other times there are not. We have been very successful over the years in bringing claims against various financial institutions for not noticing the red flags or for actually participating in fraud in some way, shape, or form. So every case is different. Every case on its own individualized merits, but frequently the primary wrongdoer is located internationally, and it's much harder to prosecute. Sometimes the SEC, they have much longer arms than I might, and are able to recover some of the money that way as well if they prosecute a case.
I just want to touch on insider trading. You had mentioned that.
Yes.
Insider trading has historically been a priority of the SEC Enforcement Division since back in the day of Michael Milken and et cetera. You see it also on Wall Street, right? In the Wall Street movies, the insider trading, you read about it. Martha Stewart went to jail, not for insider trading, but for lying to the FBI about it. It's always been there. the SEC continues under this new administration to emphasize and focus on insider trading. Insider trading is the trading of a stock, a purchase of a stock, while in possession of what's called material non-public information, also known as like an inside tip. If, for example, I'm golfing with my buddy who's a CEO of a publicly traded company, and he tells me that tomorrow the earnings are going to come out and they're going to blow away Wall Street estimates, right? I know he's breaching his fiduciary duty to me by telling me that. He also winks and says, hey, whatever you may make on this, if you were to trade, I'd like to get a little kickback, if you know what I mean. I call up my broker, I buy the stock, I make 500,000 and I give them an envelope of cash a month later for 250,000. It's classic tipper tippy insider trading. Goes on all the time. There is technically a victim for the person that I bought the stock from. Arguably, they're defrauded because they didn't know about the information that I had. But it's hard to quantify it. We don't see the impacts like we do with Ponzi schemes. Okay. But the reason why the SEC is so adamant and historically has taken it very seriously and committed resources to investigate and prosecute it, including DOJ, they still are very active in prosecuting insider trading cases, is because it threatens the integrity of the financial markets. It unlawfully, unfairly gives insiders or those who have received inside information an unfair advantage, right, over other market participants. And so it's more of a market integrity issue than it is quantifying or identifying victim harm, although there is that kind of theoretical or actual harm, but it's not, you don't see it like you see it in the Ponzi's. It's more because of market integrity.
In your experience, when you guys have dealt with people who are blowing the whistle, what separates a silent person versus a person that comes forward, and how does that affect you guys?
There's many that stay silent, and we don't judge that. It's very difficult to. It's a difficult journey. It's easier just to say nothing. It's easier sometimes just to move on with life. It's easier not to put yourself in the position where you're going to risk losing your job or having to deal with the government. Although a lot of our clients, the whistleblower clients, when they come to us, usually but not always have made the decision that they want to go forward. They may have concerns. We answer their questions. We give them comfort when we can, but we also are very straightforward with them in terms of the process. But the days like in the movies, and there's not one that comes to mind, but where whistleblowers were hunted down, or they're looking over their back and seeing a car follow them,
right?
It doesn't really exist anymore because corporate America has been put on notice and understands you can't screw around with whistleblowers, right? They may get terminated, but it's not like it was in the day. Okay, so that level of concern just doesn't exist. I think it's more for an individual to want to have to go through and invest with the process. And as Scott says, and it's absolutely true, and a lot of people just at first can't get their minds around it, most of our whistleblowers are not in it for the money. A lot of them are young professionals who were on an upward trajectory, who got employed by a company that engaged in fraud, and they're really upset. They're really mad and angry at not only being put in the position where they're working for a company engaged in fraud, but they're really upset with their seniors, their supervisors, the officers, the directors who are engaging in the fraud, making tons of money, and violating the law. And we have a lot of young professionals who just feel that it's just wrong, and they want to be the ones to raise their voice and be heard. And so if there's monetary compensation down the road, they're happy to take it. But, it's very rare that we talk about a potential reward and what the money would look like. It just doesn't really happen. They're in it because they feel it's the right thing to do.
That's very good. If someone was suspected that there was fraud going on in their company right now, what steps would they take to get a hold of you guys?
Well, For starters, we actually maintain a very vibrant website at secwhistleblowerattorneys.com. Right, we are uniquely situated that this is what we focus on. There's several whistleblower programs out there. Our practice is focused. We know the SEC rules and regulations inside out. Anybody goes there can learn a lot more about the whistleblower program, about David and I, and can contact either one of us at, Scott or David at whistleblowerattorneys.com. And we work on a contingency fee. I mean, we do spend a lot of time early on vetting our cases, talking to the clients, laying out the process. Ultimately, we have the same interest as the client. We want to help stop a fraud. We want to report financial crimes to the SEC that we believe they should investigate. And we will discuss what we think are potential likely outcomes and, the financial rewards that come along with it if the SEC does prosecute a case.
David, do you have anything to add to that?
So I'll echo it, and yeah, I mean, it's we're open for business, and we're always happy to look at potentially really great claims, but we're picky, and by design we have to be because it's such a rigorous process, and because the SEC has lost so much resources, they can only take on the most compelling of cases, and those are the cases that we look for.
Okay, given what you guys have been successful in your business, what would you tell the younger versions of yourselves that are just looking to get into the field that you're in? What would you tell them? What would you tell your younger self?
I would tell my younger self to invest the time to learn a niche area of the law, to really commit to it and become and develop expertise. To be a general practitioner is just very, very difficult these days. But commit to the process of really developing that niche and stick with it. And also, day to day, just be a decent human being in your relationships and dealings with whomever you're dealing. And it will come back in multiples for being good and working hard and kind of doing the right thing. I just think that's the way to do it. But nothing good happens quickly. Things take time. Good things require investment. And it's not a job, it's a profession, and everything that comes along with it. And it's not going to happen overnight. You don't develop a sense, a gut, a professional judgment, a reputation overnight. It's from years of toiling, of making mistakes, of perseverance. So you get to the point where, you kind of more or less, you never figure it out, but you're at that stage. And then you get so old, you're exhausted. But that's another issue.
You have to have a lot of patience, exercise a lot of patience. How about you, Scott?
Yeah, I mean, echoing what David said, I'm a big fan of the statement, do what you love and you'll never work a day. I've been very fortunate in my career that I love what I do. But a big part of my success has also come not just from the cases that I've worked on, but being very active within the community. Dave is the professor of securities regulation at the Miami Law School. I chair the Securities Financial Fraud Group of the American Trial Lawyers Association. And I was actually in San Diego a week or two ago and spoke about the chances that younger lawyers have to give back to the community, even within the legal community. I've done a ton of writing, speaking, and other opportunities to speak within the legal community and at law schools about securities and investment fraud, the SEC whistleblower program, and really use it as an opportunity to put myself out there as an expert in the field. I might be an expert on one small narrow niche of law, but I am an expert at it. I understand it. I know it. So I bring the experience along with a passion for it on the cases. So if I was talking to the younger version, when I started with a Wall Street firm, they worked me. I worked very hard. it was up to me to go out there and kind of grab the opportunities. And I wish I had done more of it earlier on in my career. I had a student come to me recently and say, "Can I co-author a paper with you?" I go, "You mean you'll write the whole thing and let me, review edit it and put my name on it?" He's like, "Yeah, pretty much." I'm like, "Yeah, sounds good to me. Let's do it." And we wrote this great piece on elder fraud, and he got a writing credit early on in his career. That it worked for both of us, and for younger lawyers, I very much encourage take advantage of those opportunities. There's a lot out there.
Yeah, that's giving back. That's so good of you. It's giving back. So I'm gonna ask each of you. You can answer in your own ways. Here at Loudr Lawyer Network, we have the term Loudr Lawyer. What is that? When you hear Loudr Lawyer, what does that phrase mean to you?
I think Loudr Lawyer to me means speaking up, speak the truth, do what you fundamentally believe is right, not expedient, stick to your guns, and embody what you were taught in law school and perhaps what you envisioned being a lawyer should be like, and live it, because this is it. This is your chance. It's a one-shot career, and when you look back, you want to be proud of what you did and feel good about what you did on a day-to-day basis. How you treated people, how you worked for your clients, and equally as important, how you treated your opposing counsel and others. I think that's what allows lawyers at the end of the day to feel good about what they did, both as a professional and as a human being.
Yeah, that's a good answer. And you, Scott?
Yeah, look, of all the lawyers you speak to, how many get to say to be louder than blowing the whistle? I'm here in Palm Beach County today, and I think if I went around and spoke to a lot of older lawyers here in the community, a universal truth that you hear is that nobody looks back in their life and regrets the things that they did or the things they spoke out about. Most people's regrets are, I should have spoken up. I should have taken action. And the regrets are always the things you didn't do. To me, Loudr Lawyer is speak up, be heard, do the right thing, and when given the opportunity, you see something wrong, blow the whistle.
Yeah, I like that, man. I like what you said earlier. Both of you guys gave the answers of giving back, being involved in the community, letting people feel heard, and being able to help. You each have successful law firms on your own. You've come together. How do you guys go about marketing yourself? How do people find you? How do they get your services? How do clients and leads come in? Because I think your stories that you have, especially over here at Loudr Media, what they specialize in is being able to tell the story and position attorneys in the way to win with the powerful strategies and connections around the nation. So how do you guys go about getting your leads and things of that nature?
So,
Well,
a variety of methods. Number one, though, I'll brag about my partner David here. Right, he is incredibly respected in the community, and a lot of people know him. They know me as well from other speaking opportunities, and we get a tremendous amount of referrals. Lawyers, accountants, industry insiders. When I spoke earlier, the thought pieces, the writing, the speaking engagements got there. A lot of people at the American Trial Lawyers Conference, they don't know remember my name, but something pops up in their practice like, who was that Ponzi scheme guy? Who was that securities fraud guy? When the case comes in their door, it calls me up and runs a fact pattern by me. Um, our website we take a lot of pride that it is very informative and gets a lot of links that way. So there's a lot of different ways that gets out there. A lot of reporters reach out to us when various stories break in the community.
It was challenging, I have to say, when we first started this, maybe 7-8 years ago, the strategic alliance. Scott is very well regarded and has been for years as a plaintiff securities advocate, an advocate for victims of investment fraud. I'm known, I hope to believe, well regarded as a SEC white collar securities defense lawyer.
Mm.
And the challenge was when we started and started this partnership on Whistleblowers was for Scott's constituents, those that know him in his capacity, and those who know me in my capacity. And then there's a nice, healthy intersection between those people to also start thinking about Scott and I, but Scott and I, in terms of our firms together, as whistleblower, SEC whistleblower lawyers. And over the years, somewhat organically, somewhat through, advertising, word of mouth, we talk about it. We are now known as whistleblowers as well, but yet still retain our individual practices. And we never want to give that up. But we have like I said, when we started this podcast, it's a very unique relationship. We basically, have married up to pursue a very particular, unique practice area, and yet retain our firms and our other forms of practice. And it works. We're very good friends. We really like each other. We've known each other for 25 years. We love this stuff. We have a lot of fun with it, and we trust each other. And so that also helps a lot.
And I'm watching you guys, so I look at storytelling, and what you just said right there, that's what people need to see when they come to your pages and when they're looking at you using the social media platforms or the YouTube, telling that story, because you guys do have a unique story, something that does need to be here. And you guys come across very knowledgeable, you come across likable, lovable. People need to see that. And when you were answering questions, David, about talking about the stories and the individuals you run across, it was just really heartfelt. And I think that needs to come across on your social media. They need to see that, not just the website, but your story is endearing, and it is different. It's unique. So love to talk to you guys about that. But I thank you both for being guests of Loudr Lawyer Network. Show like this is about people like you. So I appreciate you being here.
Thank you very much for having us.
No, we appreciate the invitation. It's been fantastic. Thank you.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir.
Thanks for being a part of the Loudr Lawyer Network. If you're enjoying the conversation, let us know. Give us a like and subscribe to never miss a thing. We'll see you next time right here on the Loudr Lawyer Network.